Good evening. It's time for another video. This time I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the golden era of blockbusters. So, yeah, this period for me goes from 1975 with the release of Jaws to 1993, which was the release of Jurassic Park. And I'll explain why I think this was the best period for big summer movies that really were actually good movies and really satisfied audiences. Doesn't mean that there were not good movies like that after Jurassic Park, but yeah, for me that whole period was the best for that. So obviously that all started with this whole era of the summer popcorn movie started with Jaws, which was the first movie that that came out in the summer and was this big hit after a lot of marketing as well. It introduced a lot of how can I say? Yeah, it introduced a lot of things that were specific to, the formula of the blockbuster. A movie that comes out in the summertime, that's designed to be commercial, often with special effects, with a kind of simple, high concept storyline. Yeah, it was kind of invented with Jaws, this kind of formula, because after that, a lot of movies try to do the same thing in a way. Yeah, of course, another big movie in this development, in this period, was, of course, the Star Wars, which came out 2 years later, and like Jaws, was also a big cultural phenomenon, maybe even more. It also had a lot of merchandise along with it, and yeah, like Jaws, it also became the highest grossing film of all time. Both movies with very famous, iconic music as well. This is another aspect of this era. You had a lot of these movies that also had very memorable music. And this is, of course, mostly by John Williams. This period kind of coincided with the careers of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, who were, the two people who kind of made the first real blockbusters with Jaws and Star Wars. And of course, they collaborated on the Indiana Jones films in the 80s. And yeah, those films in particular, I think, are really sort of the pinnacle of this kind of film. There's not much better than those films when it comes to entertainment, adventure films. And yeah, of course, Spielberg also made movies like E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. E.T. also became the highest grossing film of all time. And it was actually, I don't think it was really designed to be that big of a hit, but it did become that. It was a bit more of a personal film for Spielberg, and I think no one really expected it to become, bigger than Star Wars, let's say. But it did, And yeah, and of course in the 80s you had other films also produced by Spielberg, like Back to the Future, which is probably his biggest success as a, as a producer only, or executive producer, and Gremlins, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. All these films that were very entertaining, a lot of fun, that came out in that period. And because back then the whole summer blockbuster was still kind of a relatively new phenomenon, and yeah, it coincided with like the period of Spielberg's career where he was really making one big popular hit after another, and it was pretty remarkable. Yeah, and in the 80s you also had the other Star Wars films, which also became, the highest grossing movies of the year. In the 80s you had like every year was like the most successful film was a film that was either produced or directed by Spielberg or George Lucas. There was rarely a movie that was a big hit where they were not involved. And yeah, for me, the sense of fun and entertainment value of especially the Star Wars and Indiana Jones films of those days, for me, that's really the best kind of blockbuster film that's come out of Hollywood. And it's no coincidence that Spielberg and Lucas are also the only filmmakers that are multi-billionaires. Spielberg, of course, also became very rich thanks to owning a production studio and later even a film studio, and Lucas because of Star Wars, which became like this huge, brand. And so it's not like they only became rich because of their films. It was also everything around that. But so and then of course in the early 90s you had films like Hook, and which is not like Spielberg at his best, but was another film that was pretty successful. And when it came to Jurassic Park, it's almost like this whole period was kind of building up with also improvements in special effects, and it kind of came to a head to a pinnacle with Jurassic Park, in my opinion. Because that movie really made a huge leap in special effects with the CGI that they created for that. There had been CGI before, but not like that, not to create living creatures. And that was really a very new thing. And I think that there hasn't really been something like Jurassic Park since that, because there has not really been such a big leap, I think, after. I think that was really, in a way, the pinnacle of this kind of special effects, because I think that even to this day, there's not really been a movie with better CGI, especially with creating creatures, than Jurassic Park. And yeah, I just can't imagine what could be like the next big thing that you could see in a movie. Because everything after that was just more CGI in a way. We just maybe the next thing could be like a photorealistic human being. I don't know. which, they've actually already kind of come close to that. But everything that came after Jurassic Park was not as big of like a leap in special effects, not as big of a, let's say, revolution. Because after that, you had many filmmakers who started to believe that they could make anything they wanted come true. Like George Lucas started, working on the Star Wars prequels after seeing Jurassic Park. Stanley Kubrick believed he could make AI the way he wanted after seeing Jurassic Park. So yeah, that movie really did something that had not been seen before, genuinely, and it's the last film that in my opinion, that did that. I mean, you had films like maybe The Matrix had some kind of innovative things to it, and the Star Wars prequels, they just had, of course, a huge amount of CGI, but that's like just more of the same. You had movies that use CGI more and more to create worlds, universe, like, of course, specifically the Star Wars prequels. And then another movie like Avatar, which, did take this kind of thing, like world building and creatures, making it photorealistic. It did kind of bring it to another level of realism, that's true. But it's still just more and more CGI in the end. Yeah, in terms of quality, I don't think there has been something that really came close to Jurassic Park for me. I would say like the best blockbusters after that have been, I would say Titanic, which of course is also an Oscar, winning film and everything, but it was also a huge blockbuster success. The Matrix, which is also, of course, a big, a very successful, popular film at this era. And the Lord of the Rings films. Those, of course, are also impressive achievements and good films. Although I just don't like them as much as the old Star Wars or Indiana Jones films. I think that those films work better on the level of like having a sense of humor and not taking themselves too serious. Lord of the Rings, they are long, kind of serious films about something that is just purely, should be just for fun. But, there are, of course, very impressive achievements as well. But again, they're not these big revolutions in special effects like Jurassic Park was. And then you had obviously also movies like Pirates of the Caribbean films. But to me, those are perfect examples of how not to do a blockbuster film. I know that they're popular, but they're really not my cup of tea at all, because there's such a contrast in quality. When you compare them to like the Indiana Jones films, for example, just have these really annoyingly convoluted and complex stories, and like there's always like these different story threads going on in these films that, God, it's so annoying. You don't want to watch one of these movies and have to think about, you know, the complexities of the story. You just want like a simple mission, and it's a one storyline, one thing that the hero has to accomplish, and a likable, charismatic hero like, you know, Indiana Jones. That's all you really need. Yeah, for me, you know, there's no one better than Spielberg and George Lucas at making these kinds of movies. And for me, this era ended with Jurassic Park because it was both like the pinnacle of like special effects and the biggest kind of innovation that I've seen in that, and also because after Jurassic Park, Spielberg kind of moved away from this kind of film. He became more of a bit more serious filmmaker. You know, started making more historical dramas. Yeah, still made some other, let's say, entertainment films, but none of them really achieved the kind of popularity and success of his most famous films. The fourth Indiana Jones wasn't really good. You had other films like Tintin, which were also not good. War of the Worlds, I didn't like. Minority Report was pretty good. I also like Ready Player One quite a bit. That was, yeah, a nice thing to see Spielberg go back to like a pure entertainment film like that and have it be actually quite good. I like it a lot. It was also pretty successful, like not a huge hit, but it made like, I think, over $500 million, which is not bad. Also not amazing, but you know. But yeah, that was kind of a rare example of a Spielberg film of recent years that was like purely entertaining and that I actually really liked. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say about this. Yeah, let me know your thoughts again, and hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.